So, good morning. Would you like me to call you Ron or Ronan?
Let's go by my pen name. I'm Ronan Beckman.
Ronan Beckman,
That's pen
fantastic.
name, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of have a pen name, Ronan Beckman, but I'm adopted. So that was my birth name. So it still feels like me, even though
Yes,
I got that name.
absolutely. Today we are going to be talking about your short story, The Ambassadress, in the Masterworks anthology, which is a publication by the Historical Writers Forum. I am Virginia Crowe. I realise I'm coming up as Days Dying Glory. That's just because that was my first book, and that's kind of how Zoom identifies me. But I am, in fact, Virginia Crowe. We're going to have a question and answer session all about this short story that features in this new publication. But first of all, before we start talking about the story, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please, Ronan, and what you write and what inspired you to begin writing in the first place?
Okay, right. So I'm Ronan. I have lived outside of the USA for most of my adult life, so much of that in the United Kingdom. So my accent's somewhere around Bermuda, I'd say. So a lot of people get confused. They think I'm British when I'm in the USA, and nobody thinks that here. So, but anyways, I've lived here for a long time, and it's been a real pleasure for me to live in the UK because there's so much history everywhere. I feel just really fortunate. I've always been interested in history. I've gotten into writing really through a tangent. I mentioned before that I'm adopted, and for a long time I was searching for my birth family. And whenever I get stuck on the genealogy and trying to figure out what things were what, I would do my wife's genealogy, which is really, really easy. She comes from 5 generations of Church of England vicars, and they all married really interesting people. So I started getting interested in how do I record some of these stories, because there's some really fascinating stories coming from her family history. We have a newspaper in the United Kingdom called The Guardian, and they often have some really interesting writers and writing courses. And so I decided to go on one that was called Writing Fiction Through Family History by Celia Brayfield. And so I went to that, and it really inspired me because there was a lot of facts that I had, but I couldn't really join up. I didn't have enough facts on some of the stories that I had. And she said that fiction can go to the places that facts cannot. It's like, wow, this is the key. This is a way that I can actually get the stories across. Now, one person that really, really inspired me the most to get into writing was my wife's 4th grade grandmother, who was an actress in Drury Lane. So I wrote one book. That's my one book at the moment, Actress of Repute. I'm working on the sequel at the moment now, but she's just lived such an interesting life, but that's another story. But that's what's inspired me.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. That's brilliant. Goodness, imagine having that in your family. That's just, yeah, mind-blowing. I have attempted family tree research from time to time, but I just seem to hit brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. But
well, there's no brick walls like my brick walls, but I've pushed through them.
Well, so somewhere, I mean, it's like the X-Files thing. The truth is out there, and at some point, all these brick walls have to come tumbling down. So, yeah, that's what I'm just hanging on to.
Yeah.
But anyway. But that's amazing. I don't think I've ever come across anyone who's had that as their inspiration behind writing. That's absolutely brilliant. And I loved that quote that you.
Well, it's interesting because it's really been driving for me. I mean, I think I have. It's really odd. Even as a child, I had a greater kind of interest and respect for history. For some reason, I was always just really, really inspired by it. So as a kid growing up in the USA, I was into the Civil War and all kinds of things, and then asking my adopted dad all about kind of stories that he had during World War II. So Yeah, I do have a natural love for history, but I think it's really important to me because it's part of my heritage. That was the way of trying to figure out, where I belong in this world. So, and this was a kind of sideline, but anyways, it got me interested in history. Another thing is I've been really kind of inspired and interested in women's history in particular. So I think women's history over the ages has gotten neglected because it's just like, oh, they just had kids, they're moms,
Yeah.
But there's so many strong women in history. I think the first book that really inspired me on that was Amanda Foreman's Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire. And once I read that, I was just hooked. And I kept reading biography after biography of women. And I think in particular, the Georgian era is when women were able to kind of step forward and try to claim some pieces of independence for themselves in their own little way that they could. And that really fascinated me.
Yeah, yeah. I love how history does evolve, and it continues to evolve, and the evolution of women's history, like you say, that's a really fascinating thing, and how there had to be long periods between each step before the next big move came in. But yeah, hopefully we're improving on just how long those stretches are. But yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ronan, could you tell us, please, about the artwork that you chose as your inspiration for the Ambassadress?
Okay, so being in the UK, I'm really fortunate. Most of our museums are free, so that's really good. And I've had the fortune to kind of see this lady being painted very often. This is Emma Lady Hamilton, and I chose the Ambassadress. So this is the last painting that she sat for George Romney, a famous painter in the late Georgian era. They worked together on several paintings. So I think you got a question for me on that a little bit later. The reason I chose this was a very pivotal point in both their lives, really. Emma was kind of an inspiration to George Romney, who was having to paint for a living portraits. And these are the very boring state portraits that you would always have of, let's get everybody sat and looking nice, And he did that very well, but it was really boring. But with Emma, he had the opportunity to explore and move out and paint other things that he wanted to artistically explore. And she was at his beck and call to be able to do that. She was kind of a mistress of a wealthy man just hanging about with nothing to do. And so he would lend her over to Romney to paint. And they built a really close relationship. At this point in Emma's life, it was just on her wedding day. So she left her wedding and went straight to the studio. So that's her wedding dress right there. And I just think that's amazing, So on her wedding day, she's being painted. And this is the last time that they were together before she moved to Naples. Her husband then was the ambassador to Naples, and she became an ambassadress.
Oh, fantastic. Although, on your wedding day, really, I'm just not convinced by that. That's real commitment to being a muse.
Yeah. I don't think she was that attached to her husband to be honest, but we'll hear more about that later.
So you're absolutely right. The next question is about why that one in particular. So as you say, Romney painted her many, many times. I have no idea how many. I'm sure you probably do.
I think it's 23, but there's sketches and things, dozens. Yeah, dozens of times.
Oh my goodness. Imagine being an artist who could churn out that many portraits, and that many good portraits as well. Mine would be like stick people. But yeah.
Well, the fascinating thing is in the short story, in this little block of time, Romney knew this was the last time that he was likely to see Emma again, and he was just producing like he never produced before. And so he was being as quick as he possibly could. He didn't have time to fine-tune things. So yeah, it was interesting. I chose this one. My favorite painting of Romney by Emma, and this would have been my second choice, is this one, where Emma first went to Italy. Her lover, Lord Greville, decided he didn't really want her. And so he was pawning her off on his uncle. She didn't know that. He was tricking her into going off to Italy on a holiday. I'll join you later. Take your mother. I'll see you. But really, he was just saying, hey, uncle, take her off my hands, please, because I want to get married. So that's Emma's absence. And you can see the worry and kind of uncertainty that she's feeling there, and it's a really strong sadness that's going on there, and you can feel it in Romney as well. One of the things that I love seeing about Romney's paintings of Emma is that you can feel that there's something extra. You don't see that in his other portraiture. You can see the real feeling. There's a real energy that's there. But that was a kind of sad point of Emma's life, and I wanted to take a point that had strength. So Emma had real strength on that wedding day. She had made a decision that she was going to be a respectable lady and looked upon as such. She was going to be an ambassadress, and a tough decision. She was having to leave her home, but her home was a difficult life. And so she was making a bold decision for herself, and I like that.
So you mentioned her leaving her past life. What was her past life?
Well, she grew up kind of in Cheshire as a very, very poor girl. I think she was illegitimate, if I remember right. Very few prospects. So the lure of the big city was something. So she came to London. Historian Hallie Rubenhold has kind of done research on women in the sex trade back in those days, in Georgian days. And she estimated that something of the order of up to 25% of women in London at that time, at some point in their lives, would be involved in the sex trade. So unfortunately, she got involved in that somehow. She started off mostly being a model, I think. And one of the most interesting stories I heard about her was she was kind of working for an early fertility clinic kind of thing. They had these round beds that were electric, and she would dance in various states of undress to kind of excite the clients so that they could produce a baby. But, so she had all kinds of jobs like that. Unfortunately, she hooked up with a ne'er-do-well kind of lord. I think it's pronounced Feverfew. It looks like Featherstone Hall, but it's Lord Feverfew. And he got her pregnant, and he just dumped her. And she had no prospects, and she was desperate. She would have been in the poorhouse. Another lord who was a friend of Feverfew took pity on her and said, okay, I'll tell you what, if you foster that baby out, I will keep you. And Lord Greville did that. So she was very devoted to him, and she kind of worked really hard at trying to impress him, trying to educate herself. So, she could read, which was unusual for that day and time, but she was always working very hard on improvements. And I feel like Romney helped her with that somehow, of how to navigate the world. Here you have a simple talking backcountry girl that was going to be in the circle of lords and ladies. So I think he gave her a lot of pointers and tips and elocution lessons, maybe, as they were sitting and painting. I can imagine that happening. So yeah, that's her back.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, there's a line in your story where you write her with her northern accent, and that just hit the point where you mention how Romney feels to hear her going back into that, just slipping into it. That's a really good line. I think that was probably my favorite line in your story, but we'll get to your favorite line in a minute. But yeah. Well, that leads very nicely on to the next question, which is, what are the pros and cons of writing your story about actual real people from history?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always feel like it's an excuse for me to research really heavily. And I can say, oh, I can't write now because I got to research more. And, so that's something a lot of us history writers kind of fall into. But I feel kind of a responsibility to get the essence and the basics correct. So when I was writing my novel, I have some kind of characters that are kind of the villains, and I remember searching on a genealogy site and looking about this ballet master who's called James d'Agueville, who was kind of ballet master of the Haymarket Theater. And this family was just so proud. That's my ancestor. Isn't it great? Because, he was really well known and renowned. But I found evidence as well that he used to pimp out the ballet girls, so he was a pimp, basically. And so I made him into a bit of a villain, but I felt like, okay, I've got a paper trail here. It's not me saying it. This is the real thing. And so I've done that with everything that I try to do. I try to research it to death and try to have the essence as real as it possibly can. I try to put myself into those characters' mindsets, trying to know and feel their experiences so that I can be as accurate as I possibly can. But it's always a guess, isn't it? And at the end of the day, you have to be a little bit entertaining as well and try to come up with the storyline. So I hope I did that.
I think absolutely you did. Yes. It's a really good story.
Well,
But so would you say that the pros outweigh the cons of writing real people?
I think so. I mean, the cons are I'm always worried. Like in the back of my mind, I've got a biography that I want to work on in the future. It's another distant cousin of my wife's, who was a French artist who lived in San Francisco, and he was actually a roommate of Mark Twain, and he was a real kind of acquaintance of his. And so there's a couple of they were roommates at a point in time. And it just worries me, though, going into that there'll be some Twain aficionados that know him like the back of their hand. I don't know that much about Mark Twain, so it's really daunting for me to actually kind of pursue that. So that's the flip side. I think a lot of the history writers here along with me kind of are nervous that somebody's going to say, hey, I remember I spent like 2 weeks kind of researching what kind of lighting that they have on stage. Did they have argon gas? When did that start? When did that happen? And you worry about these kinds of details. So that's the downside. I probably spend way too much time researching on that, and you get sucked into rabbit holes very easily doing that as well. So
oh, yes, yes. I'm always panicking that someone's going to arrive and they'll be like, oh my goodness, this was my great grandfather. How can you portray him like this? So I tend to stick with fictional people, but I take my hat off to you for tackling the real people.
Well, I think in the case of like the actress that's the ancestor of my wife, there was not enough written about her. And I thought, she's lived such an interesting life. I've got to get her life out there somewhere in some form. And I can fictionalize it because it's great, but it's really hard because she works in a theater. There's a lot of actors and actresses and stagehands and people in the background. So a lot of research to do to try to get it right. Yeah. That's hard. I enjoy it.
I was just about to say, would you say you're someone who enjoys research? But obviously you are, so yeah. The next question, this is a bit of a personal one for me, because I have to admit to total ignorance as far as Emma is concerned, up until this point. So most people who know of her because of Nelson. Was it difficult to suspend the 2020 hindsight and write about her earlier life?
For me, not so much. It's interesting. I was kind of looking through my bookshelf, and I've got this one of Nelson's Women. So I need to read that. I didn't get very far on it, but so I'm not a Nelson nut. I think it's interesting and all of that. I think Emma's life also kind of went off the rails a little bit towards the end of her life, and I think that's something that people kind of fixate on. And a lot of people are very judgmental about Emma as well, saying, you know, oh, she's just opportunistic tart, you know, she's just, you know, going after this married man. But hey, it takes two to tango, you know, and her husband seemed to turn a blind eye to it. So, you know, maybe he wasn't paying much attention. But Nelson was truly devoted to Emma. I truly believe that. They really, really loved each other. And Nelson really wanted the government to take care of Emma and his daughter Horatio if he should die. That was very, very clear. I don't know what issues he had with his wife. I don't know what was going on with Emma, but she was married to a man almost 3 times her age. So, you know, I don't blame her. These are two people that came together and fell in love. But at the point in the story, I thought, no, this is good because this is almost the pinnacle of Emma's life. She's taken her first steps of an independent decision, and women didn't have many opportunities to do this. So this is something she was doing for herself, kind of a little backstab to her former lover. Hey, I'm going to marry your uncle, and you know what? We could have a child, and you'll be out of your inheritance, and see who's laughing then.
Yes, I bet that would have gone down like a lead balloon.
Yep.
A lot of your story is dialogue. What would you say is the greatest advantage or disadvantage in structuring your story like that?
Oh, well, I just thank you for the opportunity of having to do this. I had this story as soon as I saw that you know, you were putting out this idea of stories inspired by art. This just popped in my head. But I was going to have to produce a story that basically takes place in one building and about 90% of it in one room, you know, as in the studio. So it forced me to do dialogue. You know, we had to have dialogue, and a lot of dialogue I do enjoy. I love a sense of humor. So I have a lot of banter kind of going on between Romney and Emma, because I think they would have had that kind of relationship. They were both a little bit of outsiders. They weren't in the inner circle. Romney was outside of the Royal Society of Art. He didn't want to join it. He didn't want to take part with Joshua Reynolds and all the big names and all the hullabaloo that was going on and hanging your picture in the right place. It's like, I can't be bothered with that. And Emma was always going to be an outsider. So I think that really drew those two together very close. And so I've had to kind of draw the story intensely through their relationship, which was interesting for me to explore. I hope I did it all right. I really loved writing it, and it was just amazing for me as a writer to have that opportunity.
Oh, you definitely did it, or you did better than all I. It's a fantastic story. I have to admit, I'm not usually sold on stories that are so much dialogue, but it was like just being dropped into the room and being a fly on the wall. It worked so well. Yeah, I think you might be single-handedly responsible for changing my opinion on dialogue-led stories. So,
oh, thank you. Yeah. It was a good exercise for me to do, because I've done dialogue before in novels, but you know, this is like, that's all there is. There's not a whole lot going on. To get the paintbrush out, mix some paints, and that's about all. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that there's not a lot of description that you could put in there, really. But yeah, no, it worked really, really well. And like I say, it was like being an observer on that session. It was really good. Did you have a favorite line from the story that you were particularly proud of?
I did. I mean, I think, I don't know, as writers, sometimes you come up with a line that makes you think, oh my gosh, did I do that? You know, and you're really proud of it. I have a favorite line, but I can't say it because it's near the crescendo towards the end. And I think people that read it might be able to figure it out. But when I read it, it almost, it makes me tearful and want to cry. So I'm going to go really more for the comedy kind of banter kind of ones. I think for me, having that kind of dialogue where Emma can kind of tease and flatter Mr. Romney and kind of poke at him, and he kind of takes it from her. So Emma sat for some of the greatest painters around. So she was said she sat for Joshua Reynolds. She sat for Viggy Lebrun, who did Marie Antoinette, and she also was sitting for an up-and-coming painter who's fantastic, Thomas Lawrence. He's just such a talent. But anyway, so she sat for him. And she knows that Romney's kind of jealous. So he's pumping her for information and said, well, how did he pose her? Oh, he'll call it La Penserosa. So I had to sit all moody and brooding. I used you as my inspiration. So little kind of digs like that where they have a kind of a little bit of banter between each other. I enjoy writing that, and that's fun.
Oh yeah, I could kind of imagine the sort of not laughter as such, but the sort of inward type thing. Yeah. Oh, that is good. Although at some point you are going to have to spill the beans about what your actual favorite line is, but I won't ask until the book has been out for quite some time, so everyone's had a chance to read it.
Okay, fab.
If time travel were possible, would you choose to go back to 1791 or another year, and why would you choose whenever you chose?
Okay, I think I would go back to 1807, which is actually when my character in my novel actually gets married. So she marries into into wealth. So she thinks anyway. So I would just be whispering in her ear, be careful. She was an actress, as I said, and so in exchange for getting married, her husband to be said something. I'm sure there was a conversation like, well, what will you earn by the time you're 30? And she figured out, well, maybe £500 a year. Right, here's £6,000. And that's yours. And so he gave her £6,000. That's to do with what you want. And so she took that on, but I'd say, be careful. So, and it would just be interesting for me to see her perform and some of the great actors and actresses of the day. Grimaldi, who was the world's most famous clown at that time, and he really developed the whole thing of the painting of the clown and the red nose and everything like that. So I think that would be fascinating to see. That's my personal favorite.
Wow, I had no idea about the clown thing.
Yeah. So Grimaldi is kind of Joseph Grimaldi is kind of seen as the father of clown. There were clowns before him, but he came up with the kind of Harlequin kind of costuming, all the silly tricks and things that clowns do for laughter. Clowns had slightly different role. He kind of put a unique spin to it and made the clown a little bit more center stage. They used to be a little bit more background characters, but people were starting to come to plays just to see him perform. So, and he's kind of like the king of pantomime. Elizabeth Searle, who's my main character, was kind of like a pantomime princess. She was one of the first Cinderellas ever to perform on stage. So that's her claim to fame.
Oh wow, that is amazing. And gosh, having that in the family too, that's really something. So last question. What's next for your writing? You've actually already hinted at that, but what projects do you have in the pipeline at the moment?
I've been hard at work on a sequel to that book. I worked for 3 years. I'm really slow at writing and I really get stuck on research. But this has been a good kickstart for me to get, yes, you can write and you can write pretty quickly. So I was really inspired. When I'm inspired, I can sit down and crack it out. So I'll be working on the sequel to An Actress of Repute. In the future, I'm hoping to do a biography of this artist who lived in several cities in the USA and Canada. He was a caricaturist and he became a political cartoonist, lived an amazing life. He did a character of Oscar Wilde, and so there's a lot of really interesting people. He used to be what's called a flash artist, so he would go to a theater and people would pay money and he would just do characters right on stage, really huge ones, and he earned a really good living doing that. He set up an illustrated newspaper and lived a kind of debauched life and kind of sad at the end. So another one that I'm not sure whether I'm going to do it as a strict biography or if I'm going to do a fictional spin on that. So that's something I have to decide. So that's a future project. Another thing I'd like to do is to kind of write about my adoption story and reunion story. I think that's always interesting. So we'll see.
Wow, fantastic. Quite varied then.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I've got a lot of kind of theater ones with Elizabeth Searle planned, though. I mean, that's going to take a long time to get through. I've kind of envisaged a series of 6 books. Whether anybody reads them or not, I don't know, but I've got to get it out. So that's going to be what I concentrate on first, I think. But I'm hoping to retire soon, so maybe I will have time to devote to that. So.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Retirement is like a beacon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm very impressed that you managed to work so much to a deadline. If it's that you're a slow writer, or is it just that you are someone who needs a deadline? Do you think?
Maybe I do.
No?
I try to set myself deadlines. I've always tried to do those NaNoWriMo 30-day things. As I always fail miserably. It's like, so yeah, I don't know. What helped on this actually was I got the deadline wrong. I thought I had a shorter time period. I thought it was going to be published in August. So I was like, oh gosh, I got to get this out. But it was in my head and I just had to do it. So yeah, I'm glad I did.
Actually, I have to tell the audience at this point that actually your story was the first one that I got. So that you were the first person to return.
Right.
So that's really, really good deadline keeping.
Yeah, well, at least I've done it once in my life, and so that's good.
Well, thank you very much, Ronan. It's been a really, really great session. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. I'm really excited about this. I can't wait to read the authors' entries, and yeah, I love having the Historic Writers Forum too on Facebook. It's great. There's such a great community. So if there's anybody out there who doesn't know who they are, and you're a writer of history, please join them. I think they're a fantastic group of people. They're so supportive and helpful to each other. I've really I've enjoyed being part of a community. Sometimes writing, you feel like you're on your own. We're all over the world and we don't see each other, but having the opportunity to get on Facebook and pop a note and all support each other, that's really great.